Yippee-ki-yay, mother! Die Hard wasn't just another 1980s action movie, it was a revolution in how action stories were told. What audiences saw on screen looked like chaos, but the true chaos was behind the camera. Actors pushed past fear, dangerous stunts nearly ended careers, and executives doubted every decision until the very end. From Bruce Willis's unlikely casting to explosions that shook real city blocks, the production was a battlefield of egos, risks, and unbelievable coincidences. So today, we're pulling the curtain back on 20 weird facts about Die Hard, the secrets you didn't know, the disasters you weren't told, and the decisions that changed Hollywood forever. Bruce Willis wasn't the studio's first choice. What audiences didn't know, Bruce Willis was practically the last name on the casting list. At the time, Willis wasn't seen as an action star. He was a TV comedy actor known for moonlighting. The studio had originally chased Clint Eastwood, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and even Frank Sinatra, who technically had first rights to the role due to a decades-old contract. Every one of them said no. The role of John McClane was considered career poison. When Willis finally got the part, executives were so nervous about his image that they hid his face on early posters, focusing instead on the exploding skyscraper. Ironically, the TV actor who couldn't carry an action movie created one of the most iconic action heroes of all time. It wasn't a safe choice. It was a gamble that redefined the genre. The title Die Hard was a studio accident. The movie wasn't even supposed to be called Die Hard. The original novel, Nothing Lasts Forever by Roderick Thorpe, gave the studio little marketing excitement. Early drafts even floated the name The Last of the Heroes. But in production meetings, Fox executives dusted off a forgotten project folder from another canceled film, stamped with the words Die Hard. The title wasn't meant for this story, but once they tried it out, everyone realized it captured the intensity. Simple, brutal, unforgettable. Marketing needed something punchy, and this mistake became history. It wasn't calculated genius, it was sheer accident. And yet, without it, would audiences ever shout Die Hard Marathon every Christmas? Alan Rickman nearly quit on day one. Alan Rickman, making his film debut as Hans Gruber, almost didn't stay. On his very first day of shooting, he was asked to perform the stunt where Gruber confronts John McClane and fires a gun. The stage direction required him to leap off a table while firing blanks. The violent recoil and awkward jump injured Rickman's knee badly. For a moment, he considered walking away from the role entirely. He was a respected stage actor in England, not used to the brutal demands of Hollywood action sets. But director John McTiernan convinced him to stay, promising to adjust the action around him. What audiences didn't know is that Rickman performed most of his role in pain, masking discomfort behind Gruber's icy calm. It wasn't smooth acting, it was endurance under fire. The Nakatomi Plaza was a real office building. The skyscraper wasn't a set. It was Fox Plaza, the real-life headquarters of 20th Century Fox. And here's the kicker. The studio charged itself rent to film inside its own building. Crews worked on floors that were under construction, while real office workers went about their jobs just a few levels away. Every explosion, every gunshot was carefully coordinated so that the building's actual tenants weren't endangered. The helicopter explosion near the roof? That required FAA approval and was only allowed a single take. If it failed, the shot was gone. It wasn't movie magic in a studio lot. It was genuine danger in downtown Los Angeles, with a corporate skyscraper doubling as Hollywood's most iconic battleground. Bruce Willis went deaf in one ear. What audiences never realized, Bruce Willis suffered permanent hearing loss while filming. The set was filled with real blank-firing weapons, often discharged in echoing hallways that amplified the sound. In one scene, Willis fired his gun next to his face while lying under a table. The blast ruptured his eardrum, leaving him partially deaf in one ear. Willis later admitted he lived with the injury for the rest of his career. The damage wasn't reversible. It wasn't a stunt double. It was him. And the price of authenticity was lifelong. Willis's iconic line deliveries came with real scars hidden beneath the cool bravado. It wasn't just acting tough, it was paying a brutal cost for realism. The glass scene was pure movie trickery. One of the most brutal moments in Die Hard is McClane running barefoot across shattered glass. Audiences winced, but what they didn't know was that Bruce Willis wasn't actually risking his feet on real shards. The crew created sugar glass, a breakaway material made from a special resin that looked razor-sharp but dissolved under pressure. Still, Willis's bare feet couldn't always be protected. In wide shots, he wore special rubber prosthetics shaped like his feet, slipped over his soles. If you look closely, you can even spot the bulkiness. Even with precautions, the set wasn't perfect. Tiny slivers still cut into his skin. It wasn't completely safe fakery. It was careful trickery mixed with real pain, showing how much danger lingers even when Hollywood builds illusions. Hans Gruber's fall was real terror. That final rooftop fall of Hans Gruber is legendary. But Alan Rickman's expression of shock wasn't acting. The stunt team had planned to drop him onto an airbag from 40 feet. But here's the twist. They tricked him. Rickman was told he'd be dropped on the count of 3. Instead, they released him on 1. The result? His face twists into pure, unfiltered terror. That was no calculated performance. It was human instinct. Rickman later admitted he wasn't amused at the deception, but the shot became iconic. It wasn't just clever direction, it was manipulation for art, and the price of authenticity was a terrified first-time film actor free-falling in real panic. The script was constantly rewritten. Not even the script was stable during Die Hard. Scenes were rewritten daily, sometimes on the morning they were scheduled to shoot. Bruce Willis and Alan Rickman complained that character motivations shifted wildly. Writers Jeb Stewart and Stephen E. D'Souza were under pressure to keep upping the stakes, so pages were delivered last minute, sometimes rewritten during lunch breaks. In one bizarre instance, Willis received new dialogue scribbled on napkins while sitting in his trailer. The chaos could have collapsed the film. Instead, it gave the movie its raw, improvisational energy. Lines like, "Welcome to the party, pal," weren't polished monologues. They were spontaneous rewrites that captured the manic energy of survival. It wasn't a carefully orchestrated masterpiece. It was chaos sculpted into art. The explosions shook real city blocks. Explosions in Die Hard weren't just studio-controlled fireballs, they rattled downtown Los Angeles. When the Nakatomi rooftop blew up, residents miles away reported windows shaking and called police. Fox had secured permits, but the sheer intensity of the blast caused panic among nearby neighborhoods. Fire marshals supervised every flame, but the heat was so intense that cameras had to be shielded with metal casings. The most shocking part? Crews only got one chance at the massive helicopter explosion due to FAA restrictions. If it didn't go right, the climax of the film would have crumbled. It wasn't a safe spectacle. It was a razor-thin gamble that risked lawsuits, property damage, and chaos in the heart of Los Angeles. Bruce Willis filmed while exhausted from TV work. What audiences didn't see, Willis was filming Moonlighting by day and Die Hard by night. His schedule was so grueling that he averaged only 3 to 4 hours of sleep. He'd wrap one set at dawn, nap in his trailer, then jump into McClane's bloody undershirt hours later. This exhaustion became part of the character. McClane always looked beaten, sweaty, and near collapse because Willis himself was on the edge of physical burnout. Director John McTiernan later admitted the fatigue gave authenticity. It wasn't just acting tired. It was real exhaustion bleeding onto the screen. That exhaustion became McClane's trademark, a hero who looked like he might break at any moment, but somehow kept going. Real LAPD officers tried to shut down filming. Ironically, a movie about rogue cops clashing with the system ended up clashing with real Los Angeles police. When crews filmed the machine gun shootouts around Fox Plaza, passersby sometimes mistook it for an actual assault. Multiple times, LAPD patrol cars rushed to the site, responding to terrified civilian calls. Even though the studio had permits, miscommunication created chaos. Officers demanded the crew stop firing blanks until they were reassured it was under control. At one point, Willis and extras had to pause mid-shootout while confused cops inspected the set. The irony was sharp. The fictional McClane fighting bad guys was nearly interrupted by real officers thinking Los Angeles was under siege. It wasn't just controlled chaos. It was a movie colliding with reality in the middle of a city. The elevator shaft was movie magic. One of the most nerve-wracking visuals is McClane dangling inside an elevator shaft. What most audiences didn't know is that the shaft never existed. Production designers built a vertical illusion out of plywood and miniature models. For close-ups, Willis was strapped to a harness just feet off the ground, with lights arranged to mimic depth. For wide shots, a detailed miniature of the skyscraper interior was used. The most famous moment, McClane falling and catching himself, was actually a stunt gone wrong. The actor missed his mark, dropping further than intended. McTiernan liked the realism and kept it. It wasn't slick Hollywood precision. It was accidents stitched into cinematic tension, proof that danger often makes the best storytelling tool. Reginald VelJohnson was cast for one key reason. Sergeant Al Powell became a fan favorite, but the actor who played him, Reginald VelJohnson, was virtually unknown. So why was he cast? The studio wanted warmth. Powell had to anchor the chaos with humanity, and Vel Johnson, though inexperienced, brought it naturally. What audiences didn't know is that his casting decision came down to a single audition scene, talking on the radio to McClane. Vel Johnson's calm, empathetic tone made producers believe audiences would instantly trust him, and they were right. His presence balanced Willis's chaos. It wasn't star power that landed him the role. It was a voice that turned a background character into the emotional soul of the movie. Without him, Die Hard might have been relentless noise without heart. Christmas music was a deliberate rebellion. The debate still rages. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Behind the scenes, the decision to lace holiday music into the soundtrack was deliberate. Composer Michael Kamen initially resisted using Ode to Joy and Let It Snow, but producers insisted. Christmas cheer clashing with gunfire created dark humor. It wasn't random. It was rebellion against traditional holiday films. Every time bells ring under a firefight, it mocks the season's peace and joy image. The joke became bigger than the movie itself. What audiences didn't know, Kamen stitched Beethoven's symphony into action sequences almost out of spite, laughing that he was ruining Christmas. Today, the ironic soundtrack is what fuels the decades-long debate. It wasn't just scoring. It was satire disguised as seasonal cheer. A cameraman nearly fell to his death. In one intense firefight, Willis runs through shattered glass while the camera tracks low across the floor. What audiences didn't realize is that this shot almost ended in tragedy. The cameraman operating the rig slipped on a pool of fake blood while maneuvering close to Willis. He tumbled dangerously near broken rig equipment and hot lights. Crew members lunged to grab him before he slid into debris. Production reports noted it as a near miss, but the footage was so good, McTiernan kept it in the film. That sequence audiences loved? It nearly cost a crewman his life. It wasn't safe artistry. It was a razor's edge between cinematic beauty and disaster. 16. Bruce Willis was paid an outrageous salary. In 1988, Bruce Willis was not yet a movie star, but Fox shocked Hollywood by paying him $5 million for Die Hard. At the time, that number was unheard of for an unproven film actor. Industry insiders mocked the studio, calling it reckless. Willis himself admitted he was stunned, but Fox saw it differently. They were betting on him to anchor a new kind of action hero. The gamble nearly sank the film before release, as critics assumed it would flop. Instead, Willis's wisecracking, vulnerable McClane redefined the genre. What audiences didn't know is that the overpaid TV comedian became a global box office force, and that $5 million paycheck opened the door for today's blockbuster salaries. It wasn't reckless indulgence. It was a precedent that changed Hollywood economics forever. Villains spoke real German. Badly. Hans Gruber's henchmen were supposed to be terrifying German terrorists. The twist? Most of the actors weren't German, and their lines often sounded nonsensical. Real German audiences laughed at the dialogue, describing it as gibberish. For example, Karl's angry rants were a jumble of half-words and broken grammar. Subtitles were sometimes reworked because even the translators couldn't follow. Alan Rickman himself struggled to deliver lines in German with conviction. Still, the foreign-sounding dialogue gave American audiences a sense of authenticity. What viewers didn't realize is that their menacing commands were basically meaningless. It wasn't cultural accuracy. It was surface-level intimidation, and it worked. The villains felt real enough to terrify, even if their language skills collapsed under scrutiny. McClane's bloody shirt had its own schedule. That iconic white undershirt, turning dirtier and bloodier as the film progresses, wasn't left to chance. The wardrobe department created 34 different versions of the same tank top, each aged, burned, or bloodied to match specific scenes. Continuity was so crucial that a shirt schedule was posted on set, tracking which version Willis wore on which day. The shirt became so legendary that one original piece eventually ended up in the Smithsonian. It wasn't just clothing. It was a storytelling device, charting McClane's brutal descent into exhaustion. Audiences saw a man falling apart. What they didn't know was that wardrobe was carefully guiding every rip and stain to tell the story silently. It wasn't just sweat. It was design woven into fabric. The studio almost cut the comedy. Fox executives panicked at the humor sprinkled throughout Die Hard. They worried McClane's wisecracks would undercut tension. Early cuts of the film even trimmed down Willis's jokes. But test audiences reacted differently. They loved the mix of grit and humor. Lines like, "Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs," became instant classics. The comedy wasn't accidental. It was the glue that made McClane relatable. Without it, the film risked becoming just another cold, violent action flick. What audiences didn't realize is that the humor nearly died on the editing room floor. It wasn't obvious to the studio. It was a gamble saved by audience laughter, and it forever defined the everyman hero in cinema. Die Hard invented a new genre formula. Before Die Hard, action heroes were invincible titans, Rambo, Commando, unshakable warriors. McClane was different, barefoot, bleeding, scared, cracking jokes to hide fear. This blueprint reshaped Hollywood. After Die Hard hit big, studios rushed to copy it. Suddenly every pitch was Die Hard on a plane, Die Hard on a bus, Die Hard in a stadium. Films like Speed and Under Siege were direct descendants. What audiences didn't realize is that one risky action movie launched a formula still alive today. It wasn't just a hit. It was a revolution that reprogrammed the DNA of action cinema for decades. The film made Beethoven cool again. The most surprising legacy of Die Hard? It turned Beethoven into an action composer. Michael Kamen wove Ode to Joy into Gruber's master plan, creating one of cinema's strangest juxtapositions, a classical symphony underscoring chaos. After the movie's release, sales of Beethoven recordings spiked, and even casual audiences associated the piece with cinematic villainy. It wasn't just background music, it was cultural rebranding. Generations now hear Ode to Joy and instantly think of Hans Gruber's smirk. That's the power of film, to twist history and reframe art forever. Die Hard wasn't just an action movie. It was a battleground of accidents, risks, near disasters, and rebellious choices. Behind the skyscraper shootouts were exhausted actors, nervous executives, injured crew, and improvised genius. What we saw on screen looked effortless. The truth? It was chaos sculpted into brilliance. And that's why decades later, people don't just watch Die Hard. They relive the moment action cinema changed forever. If you enjoyed uncovering these secrets, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because just like McClane crawling through vents, we're always digging deeper into the stories Hollywood tried to keep hidden. Yippee-ki-yay! See you in the next one.